"You're not supposed to be here. Maintenance uses the back door. You people always think you can walk where you don't belong." Those words weren't whispered. They weren't muttered under breath. They were spit like venom, sharp, entitled, and loud enough for every suited executive in the lobby to hear. The man they were aimed at said nothing. He didn't blink. He didn't even look up. Clarence Holloway, janitor badge clipped to his chest, ring of keys at his hip, and hands weathered from decades of cleaning messes he never made, simply kept mopping. Slow, steady, silent, like he always had. But the young man in the tailored gray suit wasn't done. He stepped forward, jaw clenched, eyes full of disdain. "This is Halberg Tower's executive level," he barked. "That floor wax smell doesn't belong here. You don't belong here." Still, Clarence said nothing. It was 7:16 a.m., and the only sound in the 30-story marble lobby was the echo of a mop gliding across polished tile, and the simmering fury of a man who couldn't stand to be ignored. "Do you even speak English?" the man demanded. He leaned forward like he was addressing a stray animal, like Clarence's silence was an act of rebellion, like dignity was something he believed the janitor had no right to own. When Clarence finally looked up, it wasn't defiance in his eyes. It was restraint and weariness and a pain too old to scream anymore. He gave a nod, small, polite, undeserved, and turned to push his mop bucket back toward the service elevator. His shoulders were tired, his back ached, and his morning had barely begun. The man in the gray suit scoffed as Clarence disappeared behind the closing metal doors. "Finally," he muttered, "took him long enough." What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Clarence Holloway had once walked these halls under a very different title. Decades ago, he was not the man who mopped the floors. He was the man who built the floor plans. He was the first black chief architect at Halberg International, and he had disappeared from their company directory long before they learned his name. But history has a way of lingering, and so do keys. If you want light, build toward where the sun rises. But if you want warmth, build toward the people. That floor, the 30th of what would become Halberg Tower, was his legacy. Every curve of glass, every arch of steel, every bolt and bracket, Clarence had overseen it all. He had been recruited not because of his resume, though it was stellar, but because of what he saw in empty space. He could walk into a void and see a future. And for a while, they let him build it. Until one day, a younger, louder man with political ties decided Clarence's designs were too generous. "You're giving away square footage that could be monetized," the man barked. "I'm creating gathering space," Clarence replied. "We don't do community here, we do capital." Clarence's silence was his rebellion. The next quarter, his division was reorganized, and his name was quietly erased from all design credit. His office was reassigned. His building became theirs. And Clarence Holloway walked out the front door and didn't return, not until 12 years later, when a small facilities firm subcontracted him to cover night janitorial for 2 weeks. He never left. He never explained. He just returned to the halls he once designed, mop in hand, ring of keys at his hip, and memories only he still remembered. That morning, the man in the gray suit filed a formal complaint. The janitor was somewhere he shouldn't have been, possibly a security risk. He didn't know the irony. He didn't know that within 72 hours, a data breach in the executive suite would expose something far darker. And Clarence Holloway would be the only person who knew how to stop it. But for now, he just returned to his janitor's closet, locked the door behind him, and pulled out an old blueprint case from the ceiling tiles. It had dust on it, but it also had answers. Because Clarence knew what they'd forgotten. He knew what the cameras didn't show. He knew every blind spot, not just in the building, but in the people who thought they owned it. The courtroom had returned to a hush, but it was no longer the respectful silence of a legal proceeding. It was the kind of quiet that made your skin itch, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Denise Atwood sat stone still at the witness table, the edges of her fingers pressing faint crescents into her palms beneath the polished wood. Across from her, the senior counsel for Halberg International flipped a page on his binder with the casual indifference of someone reading a grocery list. He hadn't looked her in the eye once. "Let the record show," he said lazily, "that Miss Atwood has no formal degree in cultural diplomacy, no certification in international conflict resolution, and no management credentials of any kind." Denise didn't flinch, not even a twitch. Because what he said was technically true, and yet it missed the point by a galaxy. The court stenographer's keys clicked rapidly, the only audible sound in the room until the judge, an older black woman named Judge Valencia Drew, lifted her gaze from the bench. Her eyes settled on the counsel with a precision that could cut granite. "I suggest, counselor," Judge Drew said coolly, "you clarify the relevance of that statement to the case at hand." The attorney blinked. "It speaks to her qualifications, Your Honor." "Qualifications for what?" the judge asked. "She isn't applying for a job. She's defending one she earned." A ripple moved through the gallery. Denise didn't smile. She didn't shift. She simply breathed. Deep, slow, quiet. That breath cost her. It carried the weight of 1,000 moments when she'd had to bite her tongue, shrink herself to fit someone else's comfort, or wear silence like armor. Not today. The opposing attorney turned toward the jury with mock sincerity. "What we're here to determine, ladies and gentlemen, is whether Halberg International acted within its rights when it chose not to renew Miss Atwood's contract after her appointment to Cultural Liaison for International Affairs was deemed misaligned with the company's executive standards." He let the word misaligned hang in the air like a bad smell. "She was a janitor," he said flatly, as if that single sentence explained it all. Gasps flickered around the courtroom. One juror looked away. Another crossed her arms. Denise finally spoke. "I was a janitor," she said, her voice like velvet over steel. "And I spoke 9 languages. I translated 5 contracts. I saved this company millions in international miscommunications.
And I showed up every day, whether anyone noticed me or not." She paused. Let that silence simmer. "I was a janitor, and then I was more. That doesn't make the first part less worthy. It makes the second part possible." The attorney made a show of checking his notes. "You believe you were let go because you made some of the executives uncomfortable?" "No," she said. "I know I was." The courtroom pulsed with the truth of it. Because Denise had become more than a title. She'd become a mirror. And not everyone liked what they saw.
Outside the courtroom, whispers turned to conversations. Conversations turned into headlines. Headlines turned into movement. Former interns, custodians, assistants, translators, people across Halberg began stepping forward, sharing stories, uncovering patterns, some subtle, some blatant, but all pointing in the same direction. A company that had built its image on global values while burying the people who lived them. As Denise's case unfolded, her story evolved from a singular injustice to a collective awakening. Inside Halberg's executive tower, uncomfortable meetings were held behind closed doors. Consultants were hired, PR drafts were circulated, but no apology came. Instead, the company doubled down. Denise had overstepped her position, they said. Her visibility was a distraction. Her story had become divisive. That word again. As if honesty was the problem. As if being seen was an act of war. But they weren't ready for what came next. Because Denise wasn't just fighting for her job. She was fighting for every person who had ever been told they were too much, too loud, too visible, or not enough. And a reckoning was on the way. The media frenzy began the next morning. Word of what had happened in that courtroom spread like wildfire. Footage from phones circulated online. The dogs growling, the flickering lights, the dark hallway, the shadowy intruder. Then his cryptic warning, "He belongs to us." News anchors speculated, analysts debated, and online forums exploded with theories. Who was the man? Why Thor? What did they mean by something bigger? The story became national in less than 48 hours. But Nathan Carter didn't have time to watch the news. He was back home, in his modest, one-story house on the edge of St. Louis, Missouri. Thor never left his side. The dog was more alert than usual, pacing the halls at night, growling softly at windows, pausing near the front door like he was listening for something no one else could hear. Nathan didn't sleep much. He reviewed the footage of the courtroom incident again and again. The man in the hood, the words he chose, the timing. Something about it didn't feel random. Thor wasn't just a symbol of their bond. He was a key, a piece of a puzzle Nathan hadn't realized they were a part of. By the third night, Nathan received a call. It wasn't a number he recognized, but when he picked up, the voice on the other end was calm. "Mr. Carter, you don't know me, but we need to meet. It's about Thor." Nathan hesitated. "Who is this?" The voice didn't answer directly. "Your dog saved your life more than once.
Let him do it again. Tomorrow, 2 p.m., McPherson Park. Come alone. Before Nathan could respond, the line went dead. He stared at the phone. The room was silent except for Thor's breathing. "Did you hear that, boy?" he asked. Thor whined, then moved closer, resting his head on Nathan's knee. Nathan stroked his fur slowly. Something bigger was happening. The next day, Nathan arrived at the park early. It was nearly empty. A few families, a jogger, a couple of people on benches. Thor walked beside him, his gait smooth and silent, eyes scanning everything. Nathan parked his wheelchair under the shade of a tree and waited. At 2:07 p.m., a man sat on the bench across from him. Not the man from the courtroom. This one was older, military posture, though dressed in civilian clothes. Clean-shaven, sharp eyes, calm demeanor. He looked at Nathan and gave a faint nod. "You don't know me," he said, "but I knew Thor before you did." Nathan said nothing.
The man continued. "I'm Colonel Renshaw, retired. I worked in the Canine Special Operations Division. Thor was part of a project that went beyond normal military parameters." Nathan leaned forward, his voice firm. "What kind of project?" Renshaw paused. "One that involved enhancing threat detection. Not drugs or bombs. Intent, emotion, behavior. Thor can sense when people mean harm before they even act. That's why he saved your life so many times." Nathan swallowed hard. "Why does someone want him?" Renshaw's jaw tightened. "Because he doesn't just detect threats, he remembers them." There was silence. "He was part of a classified experiment," Renshaw said. "When the program was shut down, Thor was scheduled to be decommissioned. You were supposed to get another dog, but someone changed the orders. Someone higher up." Nathan's stomach twisted. "Why?" Renshaw met his eyes. "Because Thor recognized someone he wasn't supposed to. Someone powerful. And he reacted. Just like he did in that courtroom." Nathan clenched his fists. "Who?" Before Renshaw could answer, Thor's ears perked. He stood. His growl began low, deep, and furious. Nathan turned. 2 men in dark suits were approaching, not walking fast, not armed visibly, but something about them was wrong. Thor's growl grew louder with every step they took. Renshaw stood. "You need to run." Nathan looked at him. "Run? I'm in a wheelchair." "I wasn't talking to you," Renshaw said. Then he shouted, "Go!" Thor barked once, sharp and loud, then turned and sprinted away. Nathan's heart pounded. "No!" Renshaw grabbed Nathan's shoulder. "Trust him. He's leading them away." The 2 men broke into a sprint after Thor. Renshaw knelt down, pulled a device from his coat, and pressed it into Nathan's hand. That key they showed in the courtroom, it wasn't just symbolic, it's real. It unlocks something Thor was trained to find. You have to follow him. Nathan looked at the device, a small GPS tracker. Thor's signal pulsed steadily. "This isn't over," Renshaw said. "They'll come for you, but you have something they don't. Loyalty. Thor's not just a military dog. He's a witness.
And he's protecting you the only way he knows how." Nathan stared into the trees where Thor had vanished. His heart ached. But his mission was clear. He would follow. And no matter what, he would bring Thor home.
The GPS pinged every 5 seconds. Nathan stared at the blinking dot on the small handheld device, watching Thor's path move further north, then veer sharply east. The line cut through the digital map like a scar. Trees, a lake, a stretch of undeveloped industrial land. All areas Nathan didn't know well, but Thor did. Thor had trained in terrain like this. He had survived worse. Renshaw drove. The old colonel didn't speak much as the black SUV roared down the outer roads of St. Louis, cutting past empty parking lots and rows of silent warehouses. His hand stayed steady on the wheel, eyes sharp, but Nathan could see the tension in his jaw. This wasn't just a mission for him. This was a reckoning. "How long until we reach him?" Nathan asked. Renshaw glanced at the screen. 10 minutes, maybe less if they haven't caught him. And if they have? Renshaw didn't answer. Nathan stared out the window. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the concrete. Everything felt too still, too quiet. The kind of silence that came before an ambush. They turned off the main road and onto a gravel path that led into a wooded area. The GPS beeped again. "He stopped," Nathan said. Renshaw nodded. "Then we move." They parked near an abandoned loading dock. Renshaw opened the trunk and handed Nathan a compact sidearm. Nathan looked at it, hesitating. "I don't kill people," he said. Renshaw nodded. "Then use it to buy time for Thor." Nathan slid the weapon into his side pouch and checked the GPS again. The dot hadn't moved. They rolled into the trees. The undergrowth was thick. Renshaw moved ahead, parting brush and scanning the shadows. Nathan followed in his all-terrain wheelchair, specially modified for outdoor use. Every bump in the path felt like a jolt. His heart pounded. Then he saw it. A splash of fur. Thor. Lying still. Nathan gasped and surged forward, but Renshaw threw up a hand, halting him. "Wait." They crept closer. Thor wasn't alone. One of the men from the park knelt beside him, holding a syringe. Thor's body was tense but unmoving, drugged, maybe sedated. "I don't want to shoot you," Renshaw called out, raising his weapon. The man froze, then slowly turned. His face was emotionless, pale, clinical. He looked more like a scientist than a soldier. His voice was calm. "He doesn't belong to you." "He doesn't belong to you either," Nathan said, pushing forward. "Step away." The man stood slowly. "He's dangerous. You think he saved you out of love? He's programmed, conditioned, just a machine made of blood and fur." Nathan's voice cracked. "He chose me. You don't program loyalty." Renshaw added coldly, "And you don't drug family." The man smiled. "You really don't understand, do you? He's the last of his kind. The rest of the program was destroyed, cleaned up before the public ever found out. But Thor,
He got out, and now he remembers what he shouldn't. "Like what?" Nathan demanded. The man's smile faded. Names, faces, commands, orders never meant to exist. Then he reached for his belt. Renshaw fired first. The shot hit the ground inches from the man's foot. "Next one won't miss," Renshaw warned. The man raised his hand slowly. Nathan moved forward, ignoring the tremble in his hands as he reached Thor. He touched his fur, still warm, chest rising and falling. "He's okay," Nathan whispered. Renshaw stepped forward. "I suggest you disappear, now, because if you don't, this footage," he held up a small body camera, "goes public, with every classified detail." The man didn't respond, but he backed away. He vanished into the trees. Nathan held Thor close, whispering into his ear, "You came back to me, buddy. We're not done yet. We have more to do." Renshaw placed a hand on his shoulder. "This isn't the end. They'll come again." Nathan nodded. "Then we'll be ready." He looked down at Thor, and for the first time since that courtroom, he let the tears come.
The days that followed were a whirlwind. Thor's sedation wore off slowly. The first night he lay curled beside Nathan's bed, twitching in his sleep. By morning he was alert again, though slower on his feet. The burns around his neck, where the sedative collar had gripped, were minor, but Nathan saw something else in his eyes. Trauma. Not fear, not pain, memory. Whatever Thor had seen, whatever he had been trained for, was resurfacing. Renshaw stayed in town. He set up a watch rotation with a few trusted former soldiers, and Nathan's house was quietly fortified. The doors were reinforced, cameras installed, motion sensors buried. Not paranoid, prepared. Because the men in the shadows weren't finished. Nathan contacted a friend from his own unit, Captain Sloan, now working in a federal task force. He didn't share everything, just enough. The name of the facility Thor had originally trained at, the program designation, Operation Sentinel. Sloan's response came a day later. "You didn't hear this from me," his voice said over a scrambled line. But that project wasn't just shut down, it was buried deep. And whoever's still trying to retrieve Thor, they're not working for the Pentagon. They're off book and dangerous. Nathan asked the one question he feared most. Why Thor? Sloan hesitated. Because he passed the final protocol. Silence. "What is that?" Nathan asked. Sloan didn't answer. It came to a head the night the power cut. Nathan had been reviewing old footage again, clips of Thor in training, in combat, at his side in the desert. The screen went black mid-frame. Then the backup generator failed. Then the front motion sensor lit up. 3 intruders. Renshaw moved fast. So did Nathan. Thor was already at the front door, body low, growling. They didn't burst in. They announced themselves first. "You're harboring classified property," a voice called from the dark. "Come take him," Nathan muttered under his breath. Then they attacked. Flash grenades, stun rounds, but Renshaw had trained for this. He countered with smoke bombs and mirror blinds. Nathan maneuvered to cover the flank while Thor led the charge. He didn't bark. He moved like a shadow himself. Fast, precise. The first man didn't even scream before he was down. The second got a dart into Thor's hind leg, but paid for it with a broken wrist and shattered visor. The third made it into the house. Nathan faced him. Wheelchair versus rifle. But Nathan had something better. Memory. He threw a flash from his side pouch, rolled left, then slammed a chair leg into the attacker's knee. As the man collapsed, Thor pounced. It was over in 41 seconds. They tied the men up. Renshaw collected gear, IDs, weapons. None of it was standard issue. None of it traced back to any branch of service. Ghosts. But one of them, bruised and bleeding, said one thing before blacking out. You don't get it. Thor's not the weapon. He's the vault. The federal response came a week later. Captain Sloan arrived in person with 2 agents from Internal Defense Review. They didn't question Nathan. They listened. Then they asked one thing. Do you want to disappear? Nathan paused. Witness protection? No, Sloan said. A new identity. For both of you. You live quiet. We bury the rest. Nathan looked at Thor. Then shook his head. No, we don't run. We report. You want a full debrief? You want the files? The faces? We give you everything. But we stay here. We stay loud because this can't happen again. Sloan hesitated, then nodded. You sure? Nathan scratched behind Thor's ears. The dog licked his hand. I've never been more sure. 6 months later, Nathan Carter stood on a stage in Washington, D.C., in front of an oversight committee. He testified about Operation Sentinel, about abuse of canine assets, about the unseen war behind war. He named names. He submitted footage. He handed over the key that Thor's pursuers had tried so hard to retrieve. What it opened, no one ever confirmed publicly. But what it closed? At least one dark chapter in U.S. military experimentation. Thor stayed beside him through it all. Not as a weapon, not as evidence, but as a partner. And when Nathan finished his testimony, he turned to the committee and said one last thing. I'm not here to ask for justice. We already found our peace. I'm here to make sure no one forgets what peace cost. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. One asked, Mr. Carter, is Thor still on active duty? Nathan smiled. No, he's finally retired. The reporter nodded. And what about you? Nathan looked down at Thor, then back up. I think I'm just getting started.